Okay. Hi, everyone. Hi, Akhil Sharma.
Hey, Andrea.
Thank you for doing this. We're trying to keep the community alive during this time of pandemic. And this is one of our efforts. We're going to ask Akhil to take us through a couple pages of a story and take us through his decision making and thus enlighten us. But before that, how are you holding up, Akhil?
I'm good. You know, it's a very melancholy time, the strain of it. Like I was driving around the other day and I'm in Chapel Hill and it's so beautiful here because spring is here. And so beautiful here that I wanted to cry.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think it's this feeling of loss that's occurring. You know, all these, I'm okay, but there are all these people who are suffering. When you drive past these stores and they're closed, it makes me feel very protective towards them.
I agree. And it's hard to feel so helpless to do anything about it. Um, One of the things I've always noticed in your work is that you're able to look at really sad and dark things and find little threads of humor there. Have you been able to do that at all in real life?
You know, the world is absurd and it's absurd all the time. So to me, things, you know, very dark things exist right next to crazy things. And that doesn't stop. You know, if somebody once said that life is going on, it's always going on, even on the side of a volcano, it's going on.
Yes.
And that's how I perceive things.
Oh, that's terrific. And also, I mean, I'd like to share this one, oops. I'd like to share this one line from Family Life, a novel by Akhil Sharma. Um, My mother viewed gloom as unpatriotic. To complain was to show that one was not willing to accept difficulties, that one was not willing to do the hard work that was needed to build the country. I'm keeping that as my mantra. Trying not to give in to the gloom. So I'm going to go ahead and make you the centerpiece here and appreciate that you're doing this. You ready?
Yes. So I'm going to read to you guys from the beginning of a short story of mine. The story is called We Didn't Like Him. I began writing this the day after I finished my last novel, which is called Family Life. It took me 12 and a half years to write Family Life. It was horrible. It was a horrible experience. And knowing everything I know now, I would definitely not do it again, right? I would definitely not write that book. So I finished the book. I sent it off to my editor. And then I thought, I need to move past it. I need to forget that this horrible mistake ever occurred. And so I immediately began writing a short story. And the way that I tend to think about writing short stories is I try to find something that I can feel intensely about for between 15 to 20 pages. Like, what can I feel, because that's about the length of a short story. And mostly what I tend to write is stories that are based strongly on emotion. So when I had an older brother who died. When he died, after he died, we took his ashes to India, and we were going to put his ashes in the Ganges. After we did that, we had a prayer ceremony, and we hired this pundit to lead us in prayers. So the pundit sat in the front of the room playing an accordion. We hired this guy because he had been a friend of my brother's when he was a child, when my brother was a child. I mean, I hadn't seen him in 40 years, right? And he sat in the front of the room on the floor playing an accordion. He had his cell phone beside him. And whenever, and he would lead us in prayers, and periodically his phone would ring. And he would pick it up and begin talking and just wave at us to keep singing. He also, at some point, in India now, we now have eulogies. We didn't used to have them. We now have them largely due to Western movies, like 4 Weddings and a Funeral or 3 Weddings and a Funeral. And So it's become fashionable to have eulogies. It's become fashionable in upper middle class families. It isn't fashionable among the vast majority of the country. So this guy who had some aspirations at some point asked the room of, elderly praying people if anybody wanted to say something about my brother. And we were sort of all confused because you just don't do that. And then he began shouting at us saying, did no one love this man? And so when I was looking for a story to write, I thought, okay, here's somebody that I can hate for 18 pages. Like, this should not be a problem. So it struck me as something worth writing about. I knew nothing about this guy. I don't even know his name. I do know, somebody had told me that he had wanted to be a televangelist, but had failed at it. There are many people who are televangelists now in India on all these different cable channels. So, promising all sorts of weird things like how you can avoid diabetes by breathing, strange stuff like that. I abhor these people. So I thought, okay, this is somebody I can write about. And I began writing the story. And, you have to remember that I was writing this story after having spent 12 and a half years trying to write a good book. And so when I began writing this book, I told myself, Akhil, this does not have to be a good story. This is how you get yourself into trouble. All this story has to do is it has to look like a story. If you squint your eyes, will it look like a story? Does it have a beginning, middle, and end? Are the paragraphs relatively sensible? That is, are they varied in shape? So like at a distance, does it look like a story? So I began writing it. So here's the beginning. Here's this first two and a half pages. So this is about that crazy guy, the crazy priest. We didn't like him. Manshu was 14 and we were 8 or 10. And instead of playing with boys his own age, he forced himself into our games. Often he came out into the lane, and if we were playing stick, he'd say, give me the stick. Intimidated, we'd hand it over. The lane had 3- and 4-story houses on both sides, so closely pressed together that the alley was always in shade. Once we were playing cricket in the lane, Manshu batting, nobody could get him out. The boy who was bowling, an 8-year-old, became angry and flung the ball away. Manshu twisted the boy's arm behind his back, forcing him to his knees. Then he gently tapped the top of the boy's head with the cricket bat, as if the boy were a wicket being driven into the ground. Manshu was large, dark-skinned, round-faced. He was my father's sister's husband, sister's son. By the way, in India, that's a close relation. Since he belonged to my aunt's husband's family, we had to show him the respect due to a family that takes a daughter away. The fact that I had to show deference was one more reason that he irritated me. And because I was related to Manshu, the other boys treated me badly. They blamed me for his behavior as if whatever he was doing were being done by my family. So I began with, we didn't like him, with the first person plural, largely because it's unusual and so draws attention, right? So I was writing the story just so that it would look like a story. And, if you want to write a story, you want it to be sexy, you want it to be something that people will read. And the fact that it's unusual, the fact that there's a first person plural, which you tend not to, which is relatively uncommon, I thought would draw the reader's attention. So I wrote this first two paragraphs in we. And then actually the first paragraph is in we didn't like him, etc. And then the second paragraph becomes sort of, there's one we in it once we were playing cricket in the lane. But the reason that there aren't that many stories, that many works in we, is because it's very hard to control, right? Point of view is very hard to control when it's multiple people. There's a reason that fiction tends to have best practices. So I wrote this we thing, and then I didn't know what to do. So I thought, let me get the hell out of this thing, right? It's not working. Now, if I had been trying to write a great story, some genius work of art, then I would have spent maybe 3 months trying to figure out what the we looked like, how to make the we work. But at this point, after 12 and a half years, I was not going to go follow that fool's errand anymore. I was merely going to write a competent story. So so I wrote some wee paragraphs, the first two paragraphs, and then I thought, I need to get the hell out of this thing, right? And what's most proximate to we? It's the first person singular, the I. Now, how do you create a pivot, right, to get the hell out of the we? So the third paragraph is Manchu was large, dark-skinned, round-faced, right, which is basically third person. He was my father's sister's husband, sister's son. So the I, the first person point of view, gets introduced, but it gets hidden behind a joke, right? So if you want to do a sleight of hand, if you want to introduce something unusual, unexpected, which probably doesn't belong there, you need to distract the reader, right? So you hide the I behind a joke. And you have to think all of this stuff through. It doesn't just happen, right? Being a writer is as much sort of craft and intelligence and low animal cunning as it is talent. So the I gets introduced. Since he belonged to my aunt's husband's sister's family, we had to show him the respect due to a family that takes a daughter away. Again, there's an I, and the I is getting more, whatever Manchu, this character is becoming more pressing on the I. The I is getting sort of, is developing a relationship with Manchu. The fact that I had to show deference was one more reason that he irritated me. Again, so slowly, it's like you're putting more and more light illumination on the I. That was one more reason that he irritated me. That was related to Manchu, the other boys. Right? The I is being put under threat. Once the I is put under threat, it becomes the appropriate sort of location for the point of view. Whatever is threatened, it becomes appropriate for us to begin focusing and wondering, how is that I perceiving it? So you create a pivot by putting in third person. You bring the I slowly up in terms of importance. Then you put the I under threat, so the I becomes more and more important. I'll read just a little bit more. Manchu's father had died when he was 6. He lived with his mother in a large room on the second floor of an old house. The room had a high ceiling and blue-green walls. The nicest thing about it was that there was a swing hanging from the center of the ceiling. Manchu's mother had diabetes and got tired very quickly. Many evenings after she had gone to bed, Manchu would visit our house. When he came, he paid no attention to me. Instead, he addressed himself to my parents. He had a way of speaking that suggested that he understood other people's motivations. Uncle, he said to my father once, you know what Mrs. Coley is like. When he spoke as if he knew things, I would think, who are you to talk this way? Because I was 8 and cruel the way children are, I also thought, why do you think you can talk when you don't even have a father? My parents belonged to a generation that is mostly gone now. Those very formal men and women who measured distance with kos and counted change in annas. When Manchu visited my mother, when Manchu visited, my mother made him sherbet and presented it to him on a tray, which is the way she would have served it to an adult towards whom the family had to show formality. So, if you have a character, so I needed to get out of the we, I created the I, but I needed to then sort of figure out how to make Manchu sympathetic, because you just can't have one character behaving badly all the time. The easiest way to have a child have us feel sympathetic towards a child is kill the poor kid's parents, right? So that's what I began doing, like killing off his parents. And then another thing to do is to compromise the I. The I is what the reader is identifying with. The reader feels implicated in the I. And so when the I says, I would think, who are you to talk this way? Because I was 8 and cruel the way children are, I also thought, why do you think you can talk when you don't even have a father, right? So when the reader reads this, the reader dislikes the I. So now I have two problems, which is I have Manchu who nobody likes, and then I have an I who nobody likes, right? So this is not helping anyone. Then The next paragraph is how you manage that issue, which is my parents belong to a generation that is mostly gone now, those very formal men and women who measure distance with codes and counted change in honors. And so I am now switching time. So whereas before we were basically with the character doing various things, I'm now allowing the reader to sense that time has passed. Decades have passed. So, a generation that is mostly gone now, right? So the reason to do this is if you are, if somebody behaves badly to you in the morning, it's reasonable that you'd be pissed off in the afternoon, right? We're all human. But if somebody behaves badly towards you this morning and you're pissed off 20 years later, the problem wasn't what the guy did. The problem is you. Like, there's something wrong with you, man. Like, get a hold of yourself. And so that was the logic of introducing this sense of time right there. Now we're allowing a feeling of distance both for the character, the narrator who has behaved badly, and Manchu, whom we dislike. Also, to magnify this feeling of time, distance in time is a form of exoticism, right? Like when we think about the 1920s, that feels exotic, right? It's like people, women wearing, flapper dresses, who knows, right? Stuff like that. Um, so the idea is to create a feeling, to magnify this feeling of exoticism, because the more exotic it is, the less we are implicated in the bad behavior we've just witnessed. And so now I have this character talking about those very formal men and women who measure distance with course and counted change in annas. And so I'm introducing a foreign language, right? And this magnifies the feeling of exoticism. So for example, right, early in the story, I described the Manchu or the children playing stick stick. That game in Hindi would be called Gully Danda, right? I don't call it Gully Danda because Gully Danda is if we don't know what exactly it is, it feels exotic. We can project all sorts of lovely Orientalist fantasies on it, right? If we translate it into stick stick, it seems both unfamiliar and sort of not charming. So I want to remove the charmingness of exoticism. But here, a page and a half later, I need some charm to throw in, right? And so I put in kos and change in honors, right? So that's, you're always having to think, how do I manage the reader? Writing is a form of communication, right? It is a form of self-expression, but it is primarily a form of communication. I need you to understand how I feel. And so for me to get you to understand how I feel, I need to manage all these tools of communication. And so I need to know how you interpret, how the reader interprets. Largely, one builds that through doing a lot of reading oneself. So I'll just continue. My parents were polite with Manchu, but periodically they said something that revealed that they found him and his mother irritating. Once my mother told my father that everything Manchu said was probably a repetition of something his mother had uttered. Another time when Manchu passed seventh standard and his mother went around the lane giving out boxes of sweets, my father said, surely he must have cheated. Manchu's mother was always fainting. She would pass out in the lane and some neighbor would come out and hold a glass of glucose water to her lips until she got up again. One day when Manchu was 16, she fainted in the alley, but this time she didn't get up. For a while after she died, I did not believe that she was actually gone. A mother dying was the sort of thing that happened only in movies. I somehow imagined that Manchu's mother would come back in a few weeks and that she would be angry when she returned. She would accuse people of disloyalty for having thought she could die. Not long after her death, I went to Manchu's room with my parents. It smelled like it always had, of medicines and rubbing alcohol, of incense and cooking spices. The fact that nothing had changed felt wrong. It was confirmation that a horrible thing could occur and it would not matter. The fact that Manchu's misfortune could be ignored meant that I too might suffer misfortune and be treated this way. I got scared. I wanted to leave so badly that I did not care if I hurt Manchu's feelings. So that's all I'm going to read. But I hope you get a sense as to uh, the practicalities of being a writer. There's as a writer, you need to have something to say. Uh, as a writer, you need technique. And as a writer, you need to know how to manage your own mind, because technique isn't going to be sufficient, right? Even if you're incredibly intelligent and incredibly talented, it's still astonishingly hard. And so you need to figure out how to manage your mind as you go through the process of creating stories. So again, I hope I get a chance to meet you either uh, on the video or in person. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Akhil. How to manage your own charm is something I'm very impressed with that you're able to do easily, it seems like, to get in there and up the charm meter and then play with it a little and endanger your characters and then bring them out of trouble. You said so many smart things. We appreciate it and hope to see you here in Denver. The question is still out there. Will LitFest be live or will it be this way? But I want everybody to check out these two books from Akhil. We'll have the story he was reading from is In a Life of Adventure and Delight. It's a must read. I know it shows up backwards right now, but use your imagination. We'll put a link to these books at Tattered Cover at the end of this video. And thank you so much, Akhil.
My pleasure. Good luck, everyone.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.